The stagecoach rattled to a halt in front of the Double C Ranch, kicking up a cloud of red dust. The driver threw a battered leather suitcase onto the ground, tipped his hat, and yelled, "Good luck, miss. You're gonna need it." Sarah smoothed her dusty gray dress and picked up her suitcase. She looked at the house in front of her. It was magnificent, a sprawling 2-story timber mansion, but it looked neglected. Weeds grew in the flower beds, and a shutter hung crookly from a moss. Second-story window. She took a deep breath. She had no money, no family, and nowhere else to go. She had answered the advertisement in the newspaper. Teacher needed, room and board provided. Must be strict. Sarah wasn't strict. She was terrified. But she was desperate. She walked up the steps and knocked on the heavy oak door. "Go away." A child's voice screamed from inside. Then a crash. The sound of porcelain shattering. The door was yanked open. Standing there wasn't a butler, but a man. A giant of a man. Ethan Cole. He looked like he had been carved out of the mountains behind the house. Broad shoulders, dark brooding eyes, and a jawline covered in a week's worth of stubble. He wore a dirty work shirt and smelled of horses and whiskey. He looked furious. "I told the agency to stop sending people," he growled, looking down at Sarah. "You look like you'd break in a stiff breeze." I'm Sarah," she stammered, gripping her suitcase handle until her knuckles turned white. "I'm here for the teaching position." "I don't need a teacher anymore," Ethan snapped. "I need a miracle worker, or a jailer." Suddenly, a boy of about 8 ran past Ethan, holding a dead frog by its leg. He was followed by a little girl of 6, who was covered in mud and screaming. "Get back here, Toby," Ethan roared. The boy ignored him and ran out into the yard. Ethan ran a hand down his face, looking exhausted and defeated. He looked back at Sarah. "Look, miss, my wife died 2 years ago. Since then, those 2 have scared off 5 nannies and 3 teachers. Go back to town. Find a husband. This isn't a place for a lady." He started to close the door. Sarah thought of the man she had run away from, the cruel banker her stepfather had tried to force her to marry. She couldn't go back. "I can cook," Sarah blurted out. Ethan paused. The door stayed open a crack. "What?" "I can cook," Sarah said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "And I can sew. And I don't scare easily, Mr. Cole. I may look small, but I walked 20 miles to get to the stagecoach station. I have nowhere else to go." Ethan looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also a strange, stubborn determination. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten a proper meal in weeks, just burnt beans and jerky. "Can you make stew?" he asked suspiciously. Double quotes. "Yes." "Can you wash clothes without shrinking them?" "Yes." Ethan looked out at the yard where his son was currently trying to put the dead frog in the water trough. He sighed, a sound like a crumbling mountain. "1 week," he grumbled, opening the door wide. "You get 1 week. If the kids don't kill you, and if the food is edible, you can stay. But stay out of my way. I run the ranch. You run the house. We don't talk unless the house is on fire." "Understood," Sarah whispered, stepping across the threshold. "The kitchen is that way." Ethan pointed a callous finger. "Dinner is at sundown. Don't be late." He turned and stomped out to the porch, grabbing his hat. Sarah stood in the hallway. The house was dark, messy, and smelled of sadness. She put her suitcase down. 1 week, she whispered to herself. Just then, she felt eyes on her. She looked up the grand staircase. The little girl, muddy and wild-haired, was peering through the banister rails. She was holding a slingshot. "You're pretty," the girl whispered. "Daddy's gonna hate you." Sarah offered a tentative smile. "What's your name?" "Lily," the girl said. She pulled back the elastic of the slingshot. And this is a warning shot. Thwack. A dried pea hit Sarah right in the forehead. It stung. Lily giggled. And runaway. Sarah rubbed her forehead. She looked at the dirty floor, the gloomy walls, and the retreating back of the angry man outside. She rolled up her sleeves. Challenge accepted, she murmured. By sundown, the kitchen of the Double C Ranch had undergone a transformation. Sarah had scrubbed the layers of grease off the cast-iron stove, swept the mud from the floor, and found a hidden stash of potatoes. And beef in the larder. The smell of rosemary and slow-cooked beef drifted out into the yard, stopping Ethan in his tracks. He stood by the water trough, washing the grime from his arms. He paused, sniffing the air. It smelled like a home. It was a smell he hadn't realized he had forgotten. He walked into the house, bracing himself for chaos. Instead, he found silence. The dining room table, usually piled high with old newspapers and dirty tack, was cleared. A white tablecloth, which Sarah had found in a trunk and ironed, was spread out. 3 places were set. Sarah stood by the stove, her face flushed from the heat, stirring a large pot. You found the beef, Ethan grunted, pulling out his chair. I found a lot of things, Sarah said without turning around. Mostly dust, and a family of mice in the flour bin. Ethan sat down. Where are the demons? If you mean your children. Sarah corrected gently, placing a heavy bowl of steaming stew in front of him. They are washing their hands. Ethan snorted. Toby hasn't washed his hands voluntarily since 1885. As if on cue, the thundering of boots echoed in the hallway. Toby and Lily burst into the room. They slid into their chairs, looking surprisingly clean. At least, their hands were pink and scrubbed. She made us use the lemon soap. Lily complained, glaring at Sarah. I smell like a pie. Eat, Ethan commanded, picking up his spoon. But Toby had a wicked glint in his eye. He looked at Sarah, who was sitting down across from him. Miss Sarah? Toby asked innocently. Do you like pets? Sarah paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth. She saw Ethan watching her over the rim of his bowl, waiting for the prank, waiting for the scream, waiting for her to run like the others. I like animals, yes, Sarah said cautiously. Good, Toby grinned, because Mr. Slithers is hungry too. He lifted the linen napkin covering Sarah's bread plate. Coiled underneath, flicking its tongue, was a garden snake. It wasn't poisonous, but it was ugly, green, and agitated. Ethan tensed. He prepared to shout at the boy. He prepared for the new nanny to faint or shriek. Sarah didn't flinch. She looked at the snake. Then she looked at Toby. Without a word, she reached out. Her hand moved fast. She grabbed the snake gently, but firmly behind the head. The table went dead silent. Toby's jaw dropped. Lily gasped. Ethan stopped chewing. Sarah stood up, holding the wriggling snake. Mr. Slithers looks very polite, she said calmly. But reptiles don't have table manners. He can eat outside. She walked to the window, opened it, and released the snake into the garden. She wiped her hands on her apron, sat back down, and buttered her bread. Now, she said, looking at the stunned children, eat your carrots before they get cold. Toby looked at his father. Ethan looked at Sarah. For the first time in 2 years, a flicker of respect passed through Ethan's dark eyes. He looked down at his stew and took a bite. The flavor exploded in his mouth, rich, savory, warm. It tasted like the days before. The grief took over. The meat is tender, Ethan muttered. It was the closest thing to a compliment he could muster. Thank you, Sarah said. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The tension in the room had shifted. The kids were eating voraciously, clearly starving for a home-cooked meal. Why are you here? Ethan asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the clinking of spoons. "A girl like you. You speak like you've read books. You cook like a ranch. Wife, but you arrive with one suitcase and no ring." Sarah stiffened. She gripped her spoon tighter. "I needed a job," she said quietly. "People need jobs in the city," Ethan countered, his eyes drilling into her. "People come to the frontier to hide. Who are you hiding from?" "Ethan," Sarah snapped, her voice rising. Then she caught herself. "Mr. Cole, my past is my business. I am here to teach your children and cook your meals. Unless you have a complaint about the stew, I suggest we finish dinner." Ethan stared at her. Most women withered under his gaze. Sarah's chin was up, her eyes defiant. He liked that. "Fair enough," Ethan grunted. He scraped the bottom of his bowl. "But warn you, Miss Sarah, the winter is hard out here, and secrets don't stay buried in the snow forever." He stood up, towering over the table. "Toby, Lily, bed. Now." The kids scrambled up, surprisingly obedient. As they ran past Sarah, Toby paused. "You held the snake," he whispered, awe in his voice. "I grew up with 3 brothers," Sarah whispered back with a wink. "I've handled worse than snakes." Ethan watched the exchange from the doorway. He felt a strange tightening in his chest. He turned and walked out to the porch, lighting a CHEROOT. He watched the moon rise over his neglected land. "1 week," he muttered to the smoke. "She won't last 1 week." But as the taste of the rosemary stew lingered on his tongue, Ethan Cole had a sinking feeling that he might be wrong. And that scared him more than the loneliness ever had. 3 days passed. To Ethan's annoyance, Sarah didn't leave Dot, in fact. She was taking over. The piles of mud in the hallway disappeared. The windows were washed, letting light flood into rooms that had been dim for years. The children, all still wild, were no longer feral. Toby had actually said, "Please," at breakfast, causing Ethan to nearly choke on his coffee. But the house still had one forbidden zone. Ethan studied Dot. It was late, past midnight. A thunderstorm was rolling in from the plains, shaking the timber. Walls of the ranch house. Sarah was in the kitchen, finishing the dishes, but she kept looking at the hallway. Ethan hadn't come out for dinner. He had stormed into his study 5 hours ago, slamming the door, and hadn't emerged since Sarah dried her hands. She prepared a tray, a plate of cold roast beef, fresh bread, and a pot of strong coffee. She walked to the heavy oak door at the end of the hall. She hesitated. "Stay out of my way," he had said. She knocked anyway. "Go away," came the muffled growl. "I have food," Sarah said through the wood. "And coffee." Silence. Then, "Leave it on the floor." Sarah frowned. She wasn't a servant to be ordered around. She turned the handle. To her surprise, it wasn't locked. She pushed the door open. The room was a disaster. Papers were scattered everywhere: bills, cattle auction receipts, foreclosure notices. The air was thick with stale smoke. Ethan was sitting at his massive desk, his head in his hands. A bottle of whiskey stood half-empty beside an oil lamp. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and furious. "I said leave it." "You need to eat," Sarah said firmly, walking into the lion's den. She set the tray down on a stack of books. That was when she saw the blood. Ethan's right hand was wrapped in a dirty rag, soaked through with red. He had been trying to write, but the pen had slipped, smearing ink and blood across the ledger. "You're hurt," Sarah gasped. "Barbed wire," Ethan muttered, hiding his hand under the desk. "It's fine. Just a scratch. It's bleeding through the rag." "Ethan," Sarah said. She forgot to call him Mr. Cole. She walked around the desk. "Let me see." "I don't need a nursemaid," he snapped, trying to stand up. But the whiskey and the exhaustion made him sway. He slumped back down. Sarah didn't ask for permission. She reached out and took his wrist. His arm was massive, thick with muscle, and scarred from hard labor, making her hand look tiny in comparison. She gently unwrapped the dirty rag. It was a nasty gash across his palm, deep and angry. "This needs stitches," she said, her voice serious. "Or at least proper cleaning. If it gets infected, you'll lose the hand." "Then how will you run the ranch?" Ethan looked at her. He expected to see disgust. Instead, he saw only focus. "Do you have a first aid kit?" she asked. "Kitchen." "Top shelf," he grunted, defeated by the pain. Sarah fetched the box and a bowl of hot water. She knelt beside his chair, the lamplight casting long shadows on the walls. "This will sting," she warned, dipping a cloth in whiskey to disinfect the wound. Ethan didn't flinch as the alcohol hit the raw flesh. He just watched her. He watched the way her brow furrowed in concentration. He smelled the scent of lavender, soap and rain on her clothes. It was intoxicatingly different from the smell of cattle and dust. "Why do you stay?" he asked suddenly, his voice low and rough. "I'm rude to you. The kids are monsters. The house is a wreck." Sarah paused, wrapping a clean bandage around his palm. She didn't look up, because monsters are just creatures that are hurt and don't know how to ask for help, she said softly. She tied the knot and finally looked him in the eye. "And because I know what it's like to be trapped in a life you didn't choose." Ethan stared at her. For a second, the mask slipped. He wasn't the angry rancher. He was just a tired man looking at a woman who understood pain. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a sudden, undeniable tension. His face was inches from hers. If he leaned forward, bang, the front door slammed open downstairs. "Anyone home?" A slick, loud voice shouted. "Mr. Cole, we know you're in there." Ethan's face instantly hardened into stone. He pulled his hand away from Sarah and stood up, the pain forgotten. He grabbed his revolver from the desk drawer. "Stay here," he ordered Sarah, his voice dangerous. "Don't come out." "Who is it?" Sarah whispered, terrified. "The bank," Ethan spat. "Or the men they hired to take my land." He strode out of the room, leaving Sarah alone in the lamplight with the bloody rag and the unfinished ledger. She looked down at the papers on his desk. Notice of foreclosure. Final warning. Sarah's heart sank. He wasn't just a grumpy widower. He was a desperate man fighting to save his children's legacy. She blew out the lamp and crept to the door, listening to the voices downstairs. Asterisk. Sarah stood at the top of the stairs, hidden in the shadows of the landing. Through the banister rails, she watched the scene unfold in the hallway below. The front door was wide open, letting in the damp night air. 3 men stood in the foyer. 2 were large, hired muscle types with dirty dusters and low-slung guns. The 3rd man, standing in the middle, looked dangerously out of place. He wore a pristine pinstripe suit, a bowler hat, and polished shoes that had no business on a dirt ranch dot. Ethan stood at the bottom of the stairs, his revolver held loosely at his side, blocking their path further into the house. "It's late, Silas," Ethan rumbled. "Get off my property." The man in the suit, Silas Thorne, smiled. It was a cold, oily smile. "Always the hospitable host, Ethan. I'm just here to deliver the final paperwork. The bank has been patient, too patient." "I told you," Ethan said, his voice tight. "I'll have the money after the cattle drive next month." "Next month isn't today," Silas tutted, pulling a folded document from his jacket. "You missed the deadline, Ethan. The Double C belongs to the bank now, which means it belongs to me." "You cooked the books, Silas." Ethan stepped forward, towering over the smaller man. "You raised the interest rates without notice. You're trying to steal my land because of the water rights. Business is business, Silas shrugged. You have 24 hours to vacate. Pack your bags. Take your brats. Get out. At the mention of the children, Ethan raised his gun. The two hired thugs instantly drew theirs, leveling them at Ethan's chest. The standoff was razor thin. One twitch, and Ethan would be dead. You think you can shoot all three of us? Silas sneered. Put the gun down, cowboy. You're washed up. Ethan didn't move. But Sarah saw his hand, the injured one, trembling slightly. He was in pain, and he was outnumbered. Sarah looked around desperately. She saw a heavy porcelain vase on a side table near the stairs. No, too far. Then she remembered the lesson she had taught Toby earlier that day. The slingshot. It was hanging on the coat rack near the top of the stairs, where she had confiscated it from Lily. Sarah grabbed it. She felt in her apron pocket. She still had the dried peas she had taken from the kitchen. It was a ridiculous weapon against guns. But it was silent. She loaded a pea. She aimed through the banister, targeting the hanging oil lamp directly above the three men. Please don't miss, she prayed. She pulled the elastic back as far as it would go, and let fly. Ping. The pea hit the glass chimney of the lamp with a sharp crack. The glass shattered, and the lamp swung violently, spilling hot oil onto the shoulder of one of the hired thugs. Arg! My arm! The thug screamed, dropping his gun to bat at the flames on his coat. The sudden chaos broke the standoff. Ethan didn't hesitate. He pistol-whipped the second thug across the face before the man could fire. The thug crumpled to the floor. Ethan then turned his gun on Silas. Silas froze, his eyes wide. The smugness evaporated. Get out, Ethan snarled, cocking the hammer of his Colt. And take your trash with you? Silas looked at his two groaning henchmen, then at the shattered lamp swinging above him. He looked up the stairs, trying to see who had thrown the rock, but Sarah was pressed flat against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. This isn't over, Cole, Silas hissed, backing away. You can't fight the law. You're not the law, Ethan said. You're a thief in a suit. Now move. Silas helped his burned thug up, and the three of them stumbled out into the night. Ethan slammed the door shut and locked it. He slumped against the wood, breathing hard. He looked at his bandaged hand. Fresh blood was seeping through. Then he looked up the stairs. You can come down now, he called out. His voice weary. Sarah slowly descended the stairs, clutching the slingshot. Ethan looked at the toy in her hand, then at the shattered lamp. A look of disbelief crossed his face. You ... with a slingshot? He asked. It was Lily's, Sarah said, her voice shaking. I confiscated it this morning. Ethan stared at her. Then he started to laugh. It was a rusty, dry sound, like he hadn't laughed in years. He slid down the door until he was sitting on the floor, shaking his head. I faced down 3 gunmen, he chuckled, wincing as he held his ribs. And my nanny saved me with a dried pea. Sarah walked over to him. She didn't laugh. She looked at the blood on his hand. They'll be back, won't they? She asked softly. Ethan's laughter died. He looked up at her, his eyes dark and serious. Yes, they'll be back. And next time, they won't. Bring paper. They'll bring fire. He reached out and for the first time, took her hand gently. You need to leave, Sarah. Take the stagecoach tomorrow. It's not safe here. Sarah looked at his large, rough hand holding hers. She thought of the children sleeping upstairs. She thought of the stew. She thought of the way he had stood between her and the gunman. I told you, Sarah said, squeezing his hand back. I don't scare easily, and I'm not leaving until I get my week's wages. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. and realized that the wall around his heart had just developed a crack too big to repair. The next morning, the ranch was a beehive of activity. But it wasn't the usual work of herding cattle. It was the work of Wardot. Ethan was in the barn, cleaning his rifles. Toby was helping him, carrying boxes of ammunition with a seriousness that made him look 5 years older. Even Lily was busy, helping Sarah fill buckets of water and place them near the doors and windows, defense against fire. "We can't stay here," Ethan said, snapping the lever of his Winchester shut. He looked at Sarah, who was tearing old sheets into bandages. "The house is a sitting duck. If Silas comes back with more men, they'll burn us out. Where can we go?" Sarah asked. "Town isn't safe. Silas owns the sheriff." "The Box Canyon," Ethan said, pointing to the jagged peaks behind the ranch. "Devil's Throat. It's narrow, defensible. There's a cave up there where I used to camp during the roundup. We can hold them off there." "But what about the cattle?" Toby asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Silas will steal them." "Let him." "Have the cows," Ethan said, putting a heavy hand on his son's shoulder. "I'm not losing my family." The word hung in the air. Family. He had included Sarah in it without thinking. They packed the wagon quickly, food, blankets, weapons. They left the house shuttered and dark, a ghost ship on the prairie. The journey to the canyon was grueling. The wagon bounced over rocky terrain, the horses straining uphill. Sarah drove, her hands blistering on the reins, while Ethan rode point. Scanning the horizon for dust clouds. By late afternoon, they reached Devil's Throat. It was a geological fortress, a narrow passage between sheer rock walls that opened into a small grassy bowl. "Unload the wagon," Ethan ordered. "Hide the horses in the cave." As they worked, the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in blood-red hues. The silence was absolute, heavy with anticipation. Sarah found Ethan standing at the mouth of the canyon, looking back at the trail. He looked exhausted. His bandaged hand was throbbing. She could tell by the way he held it against his chest. "Here," she said, handing him a canteen. He took a long drink. "You did good today, Sarah. You drive a team better than most men I know." "My stepfather made me drive the delivery wagon," she said bitterly. "I learned a lot of things I wasn't supposed to." Ethan looked at her. "He hurt you?" "He tried to sell me," Sarah admitted, looking at the ground. "To the banker. That's why I ran." "I guess I have a bad history with bankers." Ethan stepped closer. The space between them seemed to shrink. The danger of the impending attack faded, replaced by the magnetic pull of two lonely souls finding an anchor. "You're not merchandise, Sarah," Ethan growled softly. "You're the toughest woman I've ever met." He reached out, his rough fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. Sarah leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. Double quotes, Ethan. "Daddy, look!" Toby's shout shattered the moment. Ethan spun around. Toby was pointing down the valley. A cloud of dust was rising, and in the fading light, they saw the glint of metal. Riders, not 3. At least 20. "They found us," Ethan cursed. "Silas must have tracked the wagon." "They're moving fast," Sarah said, fear gripping her throat. "Get the kids into the cave," Ethan commanded, his voice turning into the steel of a commander. "Stay in the back. Do not come out unless I tell you." "What are you going to do?" Sarah grabbed his arm. Ethan looked at the narrow entrance of the canyon. He looked at the dynamite sticks he had brought from the mining shed. "I'm going to close the door," he said grimly. He grabbed the bundle of dynamite and ran toward the rocky overhang above the trail. "Ethan, no!" Sarah screamed, but he was already climbing. The riders were getting closer. Sarah could hear the thunder of hooves. She grabbed Toby and Lily and ran for the cave, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Please," she prayed, Don't let him die now. Not when I just found him. Asterisk Ethan scrambled up the jagged rock face, his boots slipping. On loose shale. His injured hand throbbed with every grip, sending white-hot jolts of pain up his arm. But he gritted his teeth and kept climbing. Below him, the canyon floor was a death trap. If Silas and his 20 riders made it through the narrow pass, they would slaughter everyone in the cave. There was no cover, no way out. He reached a small ledge about 50 feet above the trail. It was directly under a massive, unstable outcropping of sandstone boulders rocks that had been waiting 1,000 years to fall. Ethan looked down. The riders were close now. He could see Silas in the lead, riding a pale horse, looking like a vulture in a suit. Almost there, Ethan whispered. He pulled the bundle of dynamite from his belt. He jammed it into a crevice beneath the main boulder. He struck a match on the rock. The wind nearly blew it out, but he cupped his hand, shielding the tiny flame. Fuse hissed to life. "Hey, up there!" A voice shouted from below. Ethan froze. One of the hired guns had spotted him. "Shoot him!" Silas screamed. Bullets began to chip the rock around Ethan. Ping, crack, stone shards sprayed his face. Ethan didn't retreat. He watched the fuse burn down. He needed the rocks to fall after the lead riders entered the pass, trapping them, but not killing them instantly. He wasn't a butcher. He just needed to block the road. Double quotes, 3. He pushed off the ledge, jumping for a lower outcrop. Just as the fuse vanished into the rock. Boom. The explosion shook the mountain to its roots. For a second, there was only dust and noise. Then, with a groan like the earth tearing apart, the massive sandstone boulders detached. They crashed down onto the trail with the force of a Thaw's meteor strike. The lead riders yanked their horses back in terror, but it was too late to stop the momentum. The trail was buried under tons of rock. The cloud of dust billowed out, choking the canyon. Ethan hit the lower ledge hard, rolling to absorb the impact. He lay there, coughing, listening to the chaos below. Men were shouting, horses were screaming, but the shooting had stopped. The pass was sealed. "Ethan!" He heard Sarah's voice screaming from the cave entrance. He pulled himself up, peering through the dust. He waved his hat. "I'm here." He scrambled down the backside of the rocks, sliding the last 10 feet to the canyon floor. Sarah was running toward him before his boots hit the ground. She didn't stop. She slammed into him, wrapping her arms around his neck, burying her face in his dusty shirt. "You idiot!" She sobbed. "You crazy, stubborn idiot!" Ethan wrapped his good arm around her waist, holding her tight. He could feel her shaking. "I told you," he rasped, resting his chin on her head. "I'm hard to kill." Toby and Lily ran out of the cave, hugging Ethan's legs. "That was awesome," Toby yelled. "Did you see the rocks?" Boom! "Is the bad man gone?" Lily asked, her eyes wide. Ethan looked at the wall of fallen rock blocking the pass. "He's stuck," Ethan said. "But he's not gone. Silas won't give up that easy. He'll find another way around, or he'll try to climb over. We bought ourselves maybe an hour, maybe till morning." He looked at Sarah. Her face was streaked with tears and dust, but her eyes were clear. "We need a new plan," Sarah said. "We can't stay here trapped like rats." "No," Ethan agreed. "We can't fight them, but maybe we can make them fight each other." "What do you mean?" Ethan looked at the rubble. "Silas hired those men. Mercenaries. They don't care about the land. They care about money. And right now, Silas looks like a man who is losing." He turned to Toby. "Son, do you still have that slingshot?" Toby nodded, pulling it from his pocket. "And Sarah?" Ethan looked at her with a wicked glint in his eye. "Do you remember where we hid the rest of the dynamite?" "In the cave," she said. Why? Because, Ethan smiled grimly. I think it's time we played. A little game of poker. And I'm going to bluff with everything I've got. Night had fallen over Devil's Throat, turning the canyon into a bowl of ink-black shadows. The only light came from the campfire Silas's men had built on the other side of the Rockfall dot. Ethan crouched atop the wall of rubble he had created. He was in pain, his hand throbbing in time with his heartbeat, but his voice was steady as granite. Sarah, he whispered down into the darkness behind him. Are you ready? Ready, Sarah's voice floated back, trembling but determined. She was positioned high on the canyon rim, 50 feet above the trail, hidden in the brush. Next to her were bundles of sticks painted red with clay to look like dynamite, each attached to a short length of real fuse. Toby? Ethan whispered. Ready. Pa, the boy answered from the other side of the rim. He had his own pile of decoys. It was a theatrical performance. A deadly magic trick. Ethan stood up, his silhouette framed against the starry sky. He racked his Winchester loud enough for it to echo off the canyon walls. Silas! Ethan roared. Below, the conversation around the campfire died. Silas Thorne stepped into the light, looking disheveled and furious. You're a dead man, Cole. Silas shouted up. My men are clearing these rocks. By morning, we'll be through, and I'll hang you from your own tree. You can try, Ethan yelled back. But I'm not talking to you, Silas. I'm talking to the men you hired. He looked at the mercenaries hard. Men with tired faces. They were cleaning their guns, looking uneasy. They knew Ethan Cole's reputation. They knew he had already dropped a mountain on them. Hey! Ethan called out to the lead mercenary, a scarred man named Pike. How much is he paying you, Pike? $10 a day? 20, Silas snapped. $20, Ethan laughed darkly. Is $20 enough to die for? We ain't dying, old man, Pike grunted, standing up. You're trapped. Am I? Ethan raised his good hand. Look up, he snapped. His fingers. On the canyon rim to the left, Sarah struck a match. She lit 5 fuses simultaneously. Hiss. Sparks began to fly in the darkness, illuminating the red bundles. On the right rim, Toby did the same. Suddenly, the canyon walls were alive with hissing sparks. To the men below, it looked like the entire rim was lined with dynamite, ready to drop on their heads. I have enough powder up here to turn this canyon into a grave, Ethan lied, his voice booming with authority. You blow the rocks, I blow the walls. We all go together. The mercenaries looked up. They saw the sparks. They saw the dynamite. Panic rippled through them. He's crazy. One man shouted, backing away from the rockfall. He's gonna bury us. Stand fast. Silas screamed, waving his pistol. It's a trick. He's bluffing. Take a look at the rock pile you're standing next to, Silas, Ethan taunted. Does that look like a bluff? Pike looked at the massive boulders blocking the path. He looked at the hissing fuses above. He looked at Silas, who was sweating through his expensive suit. Pike spat on the ground. He holstered his gun. I'm out, Pike said. What? Silas gasped. You can't leave. I paid you? You paid for a fight, Pike growled, walking toward his horse. You didn't pay for a suicide pact. I ain't dying for a bank ledger. Me neither, another man said. One by one, the mercenaries mounted up. The psychological dam broke. They turned their horses and began to ride back down the trail, away from the trap. Come back, Silas shrieked, his voice cracking. Cowards! I'll ruin you. I'll have you arrested. Shut up, Silas, Pike called back, or I'll shoot you myself. Within 2 minutes, the canyon floor was empty, save for one man. Silas Thorne stood. Alone in the dust, the campfire casting long, lonely shadows around him. His army was gone. His leverage was gone. Ethan stood on the rock wall, watching him. Up on the rim, the fuses sizzled out harmlessly, reaching the end of the cords attached to nothing but painted sticks. "It's over, Silas," Ethan said quietly. Silas looked up, his face twisted with a mixture of hatred and despair. He raised his revolver, aiming it at Ethan's silhouette. "If I go down," Silas screamed, "I'm taking you with me." Thwack! A small, hard object whistled through the air and struck Silas square in the forehead. He stumbled back, dropping his gun, clutching his head. "Ow!" Silas yelped Dot from the darkness. Of the rim, a small voice shouted down. That was a warning shot. It was Lily. She had snuck up beside Sarah with her slingshot. Ethan couldn't help it. He laughed. He scrambled down the rock pile, sliding to the ground. He walked over to where Silas was groaning in the dirt. Ethan kicked the dropped revolver away. He reached down and grabbed Silas by the lapels of his expensive suit, hauling him to his feet. "You have a choice," Ethan growled, his face inches. "From the bankers. You can walk back to town and tell everyone you got lost. Or you can explain to the sheriff why you hired 20 gunmen to attack a family." Silas trembled. He looked at Ethan's eyes that were no longer dead, but burning with a fierce, protective fire. "I'll go," Silas stammered. "Good." Ethan shoved him backward. "Run." Silas Thorne, the most powerful man in the county, turned and ran. Into the night, defeated by a bluff, a dried pea, and a family that refused to break. The sun rose over the Double C Ranch, bathing the timber house in a warm, golden light. It was a stark contrast to the darkness of the previous night. The wagon rattled into the yard. Ethan pulled the horses to a stop. He sat there for a moment, looking at his home. It was still standing. The windows were shuttered. The flower beds Sarah had weeded were still neat. It wasn't a fortress anymore. It was just a home waiting for its family. "We're back," Toby shouted, jumping off the back of the wagon. He and Lily ran toward the porch, the terror of the canyon already fading into a grand adventure in their minds. Sarah climbed down slowly. She felt every bruise, every sleepless hour. She looked at Ethan, who was unhitching the horses. "I'll start." "Breakfast," she said, her voice quiet. "Sarah," Ethan called out. She stopped. He walked around the wagon. He looked different in the morning light. The anger that had etched deep lines into his face for 2 years was gone, smoothed away by the victory of the night. "Leave the stove," he said. "Come here." He led her to the porch swing, the one he hadn't sat in since his wife died. He sat down and patted the space beside him. Sarah sat, leaving a respectable distance between them. Her heart was pounding. The danger was over, which meant reality was crashing back and Ethan looked out at the horizon. "Silas is halfway to the state line by now. I reckon he won't be back. With him gone, the bank will send someone reasonable. We can make the payments after the cattle drive." "That's good news," Sarah said, folding her hands in her lap. "You saved the ranch, Ethan." "We saved it," he corrected. He turned to look at her. "You threw a rock at a gunman. My son made fake dynamite. My daughter shot the most powerful man in the county with a dried pea." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I haven't been this proud in a long time." Then his face grew serious. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was the advertisement she had answered. "Your week is up," Ethan said. Sarah felt a cold stone drop in her stomach. "Oh, yes, I suppose it is." She stood up quickly, trying to hide the tears stinging her eyes. "I'll go pack my things. The stagecoach comes at noon." "Sit down, Sarah," Ethan growled softly. She froze. "I'm not firing you," Ethan said. He crumpled the paper in his fist. "But I am terminating your contract." Sarah looked at him, confused. "I don't understand." Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked at his bandaged hand, then at her. "I hired a teacher," he said slowly. "I hired a cook. I hired someone to keep my kids alive." He looked up, his dark eyes burning with intensity. "But somewhere between the stew and the canyon ... you stopped being an employee. You became the one thing I swore I'd never need again." "And what is that?" Sarah whispered. "A partner," Ethan said. He reached out and took her hand, the one that wasn't holding the crumpled paper. "You fixed my hand. You fixed my house. You fixed my kids." He squeezed her fingers. "And you fixed me." "Ethan." "I don't want a nanny, Sarah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I can hire a cook in town. I can hire a tutor. But I can't hire a woman who looks at a rattlesnake without flinching and looks at a broken man without pity." He stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. The distance between them vanished. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not for a week, not for a wage, forever." Sarah searched his face. She saw the fear there, the fear of rejection, the fear of loving again. It mirrored her own. "I ran away from a marriage I didn't want," Sarah whispered. "I swore I'd never belong to anyone again." Ethan moved his hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. "I'm not asking you to belong to me," he vowed. "I'm asking you to walk beside me, equal, free, but together." Sarah looked over his shoulder. Through the window, she could see Toby and Lily watching them, their noses pressed against the glass. Lily was giving 2 thumbs up. Sarah smiled. She looked back at the giant, terrifying, wonderful man in front of her. "The cooking is going to be terrible if you distract me," she teased. Ethan smiled a real wide smile that transformed his face. "I'll take the risk." He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was deep, claiming, and full of the fire that had saved them in the canyon. It tasted of dust and sunrise, and a promise kept. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Double C Ranch was unrecognizable. Flowers bloomed in every bed. The fences were painted. The sound of laughter drifted from the open windows. Ethan sat on the porch, watching Toby teach Lily how to rope a fence post. The screen door creaked open. Sarah stepped out, holding a baby, a new addition to the Cole family, in her arms. "He's finally asleep," she whispered. Ethan stood up and walked over to them. He kissed the baby's forehead, then Sarah's. "You look tired, Mrs. Cole," he murmured. "I am," Sarah smiled, leaning into him, "but it's a good tired." "I was thinking," Ethan sighed, wrapping his arm around her. "We should hire a nanny." Sarah laughed, the sound bright and clear in the mountain air. "Absolutely not," she said. "I just end up firing her." "Why?" "Because," Sarah looked at her husband and her children, "this is my job, and I'm never quitting." Ethan pulled her closer. As the sun set over their land, grateful for the day, a runaway girl with a suitcase walked up his steps and turned a house back into a home. The end.